This portion of the platform is brought to you by Rumettes, the fastest way to bring the illusion of 3D detail to the insides of your model railroad structures. And by City Classics, producers of realistic miniature buildings, signs, and accessories for model railroaders since 1989. Available at your local hobby shop or order direct.
Hello everyone, welcome to The Platforum, the podcast for the rail fan and the model railroader alike. We are coming to you from the north shore of Lake Ontario, somewhere between Toronto and Montreal, along a very busy rail corridor, hosting between 40 and 50 trains a day. In addition to our 3 studio cameras, we also have a Railstream rail cam mounted to our station here, giving us a bird's eye view of the passing rail action. And also our favorite grade crossing, and who knows, today we might get an oil pan scrape or two. Joining me again on the platform today is the director of photography for the Discovery Series Rocky Mountain Railroad, Michael Cammidge. Mike, welcome back to the platform.
Thanks for having me.
So Mike, all right, we've talked about the production of the show, we've talked about your background. I want to get right down to brass tacks. Let's talk about the episodes of this show and some of the trials and tribulations and some of the highlights that you have from filming. I guess we should say we have another guest today. I don't know if we can get a shot of it or not, but we've got some birds that are joining us on the platform today. So if you see us looking back there, or you hear some chirping, we've got a nest with some baby birds that very much want to be on the show today. So Mike, I've watched most of the series. I haven't seen all of the episodes. I've certainly watched a lot of clips and familiar with the show. The production quality is unbelievable. The drone footage, just the scenery, and I mean, you put trains in the mountains and add some snow and some drama, and you've got the makings for a killer TV show. So I want to talk to you about some things that stood out in my mind, and then maybe you can unpack them for us and tell us kind of the backstory and some other things. The spring runoff seems to be, the spring thaw and the runoff in the mountain seems to be a very big deal to Canadian Pacific. Would you agree?
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that a big, part of operating the railroad is battling the elements. At all times, it never ends. And in the Rocky Mountains in particular, the washouts are, huge issues. So during the spring thaw, obviously, rocks that have been coming loose for maybe decades are they get filled with water in the fall, and they freeze, and then they thaw, and then that can sort of burst a dam even and come down onto the railroads. But the priority is to always keep the goods moving along the railroad. So they actually will spare no expense in doing so. So there was times where we witnessed huge rock slides that would come down off the mountain, mudslides, and the railroad would have that cleaned up in hours, and you would look at it and go, oh my God, like they're gonna have to run tracks like 100 miles in another direction, like how are they gonna ever get through this? But they'll take dynamite out there, they'll they have excavators on standby along particular points of the track where they anticipate washouts happening.
So they have staged equipment.
They have
in anticipation of a potential washout.
Correct. Yeah, in particular,
slide.
I know around like in the Revelstoke area, the roadmaster actually would go in. He would outsource excavators from local owners, and he would just do a daily rental, and he would just have it standing by on the tracks for there was like a 9-mile stretch, and every like 50, 100 meters he would have an excavator just waiting there. And if something happened, it was like, because it would take time to get an excavator in there, right? You'd have to source it, so he's like, we're not going to do that, we're going to have it on standby, and they pay a premium expense for it. And obviously that's...
Any idea what kind of per diem cost that type of operation?
I've heard that they spare no expense. It could be upwards in the millions of dollars that they actually
per day.
Per day, yeah. But when you consider one of these loads on a train, there's $100 million worth of goods. Like, that's nothing.
And if you put one in the ditch, You know,
and if you put one in a ditch or you can't get it delivered to a boat that's, you know, heading overseas, like that's big money loss, right? So
yeah, it's interesting to look at the, you know, the scale and the scope of this. That the operation is so big and so extensive, and there's so many millions of dollars at play that you can spend a few $1 million a day just in case.
Just in case.
And be saving money.
And be
potentially saving money.
Be saving money. And I mean, listen, like I can't actually quote what their their expenditures are. But you know, I mean, and they keep on top of it. Like they have you know, geologists and engineers that are constantly monitoring you know, what's going on up in the mountains, you know what I mean? Like they anticipate, okay, well, there's a big melt here and there's a pocket of water here and there's you know, some rocks here that look like they're going to break, and you know, so they know, it's like we got to keep an eye here. And
were they doing any proactive work, like actually going up and prying loose rock off themselves?
Yes.
Or getting going up and forcing water to drain off?
They actually do, and we did an episode on this, but they do controlled...
like a controlled avalanche or
they do controlled
slide.
Avalanche, yeah. So we filmed that. So they have a guy who actually goes up there in the helicopter. He's got dynamite, and he, you know, he's...
What'd you do today? Well,
exactly.
I went up the mountain with a helicopter, dropped some dynamite.
Yeah. Well, the first thing he does is he goes up in the mountains, and then he gets his skis on, and he'll actually ski to the top of a hill somewhere, and he'll do tests in the snow to see, you know, okay, I anticipate this being an avalanche in the future, and so then he'll get some explosives and he'll drop them and he'll cause
This is a James Bond movie.
This is a James Bond movie, yeah, and we film it, you know, safely from the ground. You know, we put GoPros in the helicopters, and then we film it from the ground, and we, you know, see him drop stuff, and then boom, it drops, and then you just see an you know, avalanche of great force coming, and then it'll cover the tracks, but as soon as it does, they have a train come through with a plow, exactly, and it will clear the tracks. And
a lot of those plows were built just after the turn of the last century.
They're very old.
Some of them were built like 1920 or even in the teens, I think, some of the first ones, and they're still being used today.
Is that right?
It's amazing how technology hasn't improved plowing snow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah.
Creature comforts have probably increased in terms of keeping the operator warm, but the good old V-shaped wedge plow still getting the job done.
Getting the job done, yeah.
You mentioned GoPros in the helicopter. Is that how you got the footage on the trains themselves? Did you attach them to like the fuel tanks of the locomotives and
Sure.
and things like that? Because I noticed there's some really cool
rail
wheel footage.
Yeah, we would do that. We would mount a GoPro on the exterior of the train, especially on the front of the train. Those shots you see, you know, again, because safety was really important to CP Rail and to the production company. So we would, you know, when the train is stopped in the yard, they would let us mount our cameras, and then the actual photographer, the videographer, would be securely in the train. He would never go on the outside of the train while it was moving.
How much footage can you get on a GoPro? Are they rated for so many hours, or how does that work?
It depends. I mean, it depends on the battery backpack. You know, if you have a 128 gig card, you can get up to, you know, say 3.5 hours. But it depends on the weather. If it's warm, the battery doesn't die as quickly, right?
Especially on the front of the locomotive, you have a cold driving wind. It's going to kill your...
Yeah. So realistically, you can get maybe an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we were saying off camera, the production is like a 10-to-1. It's like making maple syrup. You start with, you know, 10 units of film, and you boil it down to maybe one hour of what you're going to use.
There's a ton of stuff you film, and not all of it makes it, of course.
Yeah,
so.
And of course you don't know that at the time. So in real time, when you're setting up your shots, you have to treat every one as if it could make the final cut.
100%.
So the quality's got to be there for everything.
Always, yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly.
I would imagine the GoPros could get gummed up too. You know, they're on the hood of a locomotive going.
Well, that's the thing. It's usually only the first few minutes you actually get footage, because as soon as a drop of rain or a bit of dirt hits it, the shot is now ruined.
It's done.
Right?
Yeah, and that GoPro might be on that locomotive for half a day.
Oh yeah, we get them back sometimes, and they're, you know,
Toast.
covered in dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, talk to me about the episode about moving the reactor. Walk
Yeah.
us through that and some of the challenges that presented for that episode.
The dimensional load, yeah. So
What was happening? Let's set up for those who maybe haven't seen the episode. What was happening?
what it was a 210-ton fertilizer reactor. And don't ask me how exactly it works, because I don't know. But what I know is that it was made in Europe, and I believe in Belgium, and it was shipped on a huge boat to Thunder Bay. And from Thunder Bay, it was moved off the boat onto some rail cars, and then those were shipped to Moose Jaw. We flew out to Thunder Bay, and we filmed the ship's arrival. And another company that was not CP was actually responsible for getting it off. So they use a crane that's built onto the ship, and it actually lifts the reactor and it places it onto some rail cars. But the manufacturers of the reactor, they have built into the reactor basically landing arms that need to line up with some steel plates on the actual rail cars that it's going to go on. And then the rail car in turn has built landing pads for those. So they need to line up. And so they lift it off and they're loading it down. And of course, the landing pad and the arms are inches off.
Oh no.
And so this is a disaster for a number of reasons. Firstly, there is a storm coming in. And secondly, that boat is on a tight schedule and it has to leave. So the captain's like, you guys got 3 hours to fix this and I'm gone. And they're like, well, we need a day. And they're like, so they have to re-weld all these plates.
Could they put the reactor on the ground and get the boat out of there?
No, they cannot.
Okay, so you can't just dump it on
You cannot do that. And this thing is worth, tens of millions of dollars. And so it's literally just hanging there on this arm while these guys have to unweld and then re-weld to the train. And I think it was over the course of 2 cars because it has to bend as well too. So these sort of landing pads, they have to pivot, right? So it's a complicated thing,
Yeah.
So they, worked their butts off and they made it work. And it was, with like 30 seconds to spare. And then, the next shot is the boat just gone through,
We're out of here.
We're out of here, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, they spend, a day or so. They have to now officially weld it to the actual rail cars, strap it in. And then the journey begins across country. And so we followed it. That was part of our story. Was we follow this and sort of leapfrog it and set up in different environments to see it. Leaving the Thunder Bay area and crossing the prairies.
Did you ride the train at all on that?
There was a couple
episode?
points we would ride with the engineers, and they would tell us, this is the load we have right now. This is how fast we have to go. This is why we have to be careful at certain corners. And then I was, following it with a drone through various landscapes across
More
the
of
country.
that wonderful drone footage.
More of that wonderful drone footage, yeah.
How long, do you recall about how long it took from when the train departed Thunder Bay till it got to Moose Jaw?
I think it was 3 days.
3 days.
I think it was about 3 days, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember any particular challenges that once it was en route, were there clearance issues that had to be dealt with, or?
It was, not necessarily clearance issues. The biggest issue they had was there was somewhere just before the prairies, there was a big turn in the tracks, and that was their only concern. It was like, how is this going to handle it?
It's got to pivot and
it's got to pivot. Yeah. Are these pivot points going to work? Of course, they were confident it would, and it did. But we of course leapfrogged ahead to that, and we're filming it. You know what I mean, just to see it. But it went very smoothly.
Yeah.
These guys know what they're doing.
Isn't that amazing that something with that amount of cost and that amount of size and such a tight schedule, and the pins don't line up with the.
And it can happen, right?
Somebody got a strongly worded email after.
They were upset, and it wasn't CP and it wasn't the boat. It was another company that just
some contractor that. Was
and
involved in
it's
mix.
like, hey, things happen. You never know. There's so many. That's got to be so hard to get correctly.
Measure twice, weld once. That's what I always say.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
talk to me about Stony Creek Bridge. That's a pretty majestic structure.
Yes, Stony Creek Bridge. So, I mean, obviously, we always knew we wanted to do a story on the Stony Creek Bridge when we started the show. It's got, immense history, obviously. There had been a derailment there, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago. And there's actually pieces of train still actually in the ravine below.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And it's all overgrown, but if you look down, you can see a little bit of wheels and whatnot.
Yep.
Oh, there's your train.
I hear our second guest arriving.
There it is.
So was there an episode dedicated to the bridge, or did it just appear in different episodes?
No, there's a big, you definitely see it throughout the entire season, but there was one story which was filled, the majority of an episode that we did solely on the Stony Creek Bridge, and that was actually the maintenance of it we focused on.
Okay. I don't believe I saw that episode. Now I'm intrigued and I want to go back and watch that. Hang on, Mike. Here comes our second guest. I'm telling you, there's worse ways to spend your day than sitting beside the tracks, talking, and trains go by. So the episode features the maintenance of Stony Creek Bridge. Mm-hmm. So walk me through the production of that episode. So there must have been some meetings. Safety would be huge on this day.
Yeah, we did a lot of planning. I don't know how often. I would assume probably every couple months they send a crew out there that does a very, very, very detailed inspection of the rivets and the bolts and, the underbelly of the entire bridge.
Yeah.
There's no road access to it, so they have to go in by rail cars. So we start just before the Connaught Tunnel. We load into a rail car. We drive, and they wait for the RTC in Calgary to say, okay, you've got an hour window to do your inspection.
So what does CP have on site for the inspection? Is there a boom truck?
Exactly.
What do they have?
Yeah, so they have a truck that has a boom arm that actually goes over, and there's a little bucket, and a guy sits in the bucket, and he goes over it, and he does all the inspections of
So down underneath.
So down and under it goes. And initially we said, well, how are we going to film this? You know what I mean? And there was talk of hanging me actually off the bridge, and they had some climbing experts that had ropes and the harness and everything, and they were going to hang me off, and I was going to shoot it with the camera. And then when we got there, I was like, you know what? I got a drone. Why don't we just use the drone?
Were you getting the cold sweats?
Well, I was, because we did actually do a little test where I went off the side, and it was just too difficult for me to hold the camera.
How are you with heights generally?
You know what? I had a big fear of heights, and I fixed that by sort of forcing myself to encounter that.
Was that the day
fear.
You fixed it?
No, I had done it years before.
Because that'll do it.
That'll do it, yeah.
Mike, we hear you're not good with heights. We've got an idea. We're going to high rail you up to the Stony Creek Bridge, and we're going to put a couple of straps on you, and you're going to go for a look.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. So, we didn't end up hanging me off. What we did is we used the drone to actually film the wide shots of the bucket and the operator going over.
How did that work? Work out okay?
It worked great. And then we put GoPros in the bucket with him. And then at one point I actually went in the bucket with him, and just so he could sort of show me what he was doing, and he would find any kind of like corrosion or rusting. He would be like, this has to be replaced, this has to be replaced.
And would he tag it with marker paint or a dabber or something?
Yeah, he's got some spray paint, and he marks it, and then they will come back. And
so they don't necessarily replace it that day.
No.
They just mark it, and then a crew will come out. And
correct. Exactly.
So that they babysit that bridge.
Yeah. And what I had found out from the workers, how the derailment had happened is, so the Stony Creek Bridge is coming into the bridge. There's a corner that you go around, and then you cross the bridge, and then you go around another corner.
It's an S-curve.
It's an S-curve, exactly. So what they found out is that the trains that go over it have to be loaded, because if they're too long and they're not loaded, once the locomotive goes around the S at the front, if the back of the train, if there's too much weight, and the front there's too much weight, it stretches it. And that's how the derailment had happened 100 years ago. So they obviously make sure that doesn't happen again. But I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting. And who would have thought of that,
Yeah.
Obviously, you learn the hard way on that one.
I imagine being in the bucket with the bridge inspector was, like, how long were you down there?
Oh, not that long, maybe a half an hour. But we spent a few hours on the bridge. There would be, times a train would come through and we would have to, sort of move to the side. They knew we were there, so they'd come very slow. They're always communicating with us. It was one of these rare experiences where you really appreciate what you're doing because nobody gets in there.
No pun intended, but did the gravity of the situation impress upon you at the time when you were there? Like, you must have been thinking, I'm in a bucket underneath Stony Creek Bridge.
Yeah, I was.
This is pretty cool.
There's such history to that. I just remember thinking, wow, I'm really privileged to be here.
People don't get to do this.
You can't, you can see the bridge from the highway a little bit, but getting up close and personal with it is impossible.
I mean, you could reach out and touch the structure, presumably.
I was standing on the structure.
Underneath, too, There's people that have worked for CP for 35 years that have never been in that position because their role in the railway doesn't allow for that. So
no, exactly.
There's only a handful of people that have ever done that.
It's true. I mean, there is one hiking trail that you park your car off the side of the highway, you can hike in for a couple hours, and you can get sort of close to the bottom and see up. But in terms of walking on it and touching it, I'm one of a handful of lucky people from the outside world.
So it's just you and I talking here. Nobody's watching this. Be honest with me. Does it say Mike was here underneath the Stony Creek Bridge now?
It does, right?
I mean, is that a thing?
There's a big banner, actually. I'd
want to put my initials there or something with a Sharpie.
I never thought of doing that. When we're in those situations where I'm so focused and I'm working so hard on, I'm flying a drone, I'm shooting a big camera, I'm focusing on story.
I'm staring hundreds of feet down at Stony Creek. Yeah.
There's so much going through your head that the last thing I'm thinking about is leaving my mark there. But
yeah, what time of year were you filming at Stony? Do you remember?
This was in April, I would think. Yeah.
So the snow is pretty much past tense by then.
There's still snow. There's definitely still snow, but it's been melting. But yeah, no, there's still a good amount of snow up there.
Are there any other episodes or specific shooting days that stand out to you that you'd want to share with us?
Little things like getting to ride through the Connaught tunnels. We did a story on the guys that maintain the ventilation system in the Connaught tunnels. Something you don't really think about, but like I said, CP is so on top of safety. They anticipate, in the 1 in a million shot that, say, they have a locomotive that breaks down in the middle of the tunnel. Well, there's no air in there, so they worry about their operators. Well, until they could rescue them, they would probably run out of air. So they've built a ventilation system, so they maintain that. And we had the guy, we did a story where the guys were replacing the motor that actually keeps the fans moving. Mm-hmm. Cool experience, obviously, going through the Connaught Tunnel is like when you enter it, it is pitch dark and you can see a pin light at the other end.
It's arrow straight.
It's just right in front of you, yeah, and
So what else comes to mind as part of your personal highlight film of doing this show? Just oddities that happened or characters you met?
I mean, another thing that really stands out is the workers on the railroad. They all love what they do. They're not guys that are just like 9-to-5ers waiting to punch out. It's
even the guy in the inspection bucket at Stony Creek Bridge.
He loved what he did. Yeah. He'd been there for like 20 some
Doesn't do
years.
roller coasters. He can't stand them.
Doesn't like roller coasters. No. They're all like professional to a T, right? They got a playbook that they follow, but I envy the life. It's like, wow, imagine getting to live out in the Rockies, work on this railroads, make good money. Could life be better than that? I don't know. It seems like it's as good as it gets.
How often did you actually ride in a locomotive during the series? Was that fairly rare for you to do that?
I did a couple times, but it was primarily the other crew that I was with. Like I said, I would be the guy that filmed the train when it go by, and I was the drone operator. So, my audio guy and my second camera would go in with the operators, and then I would drive ahead and film the train as it would pass by in various backgrounds.
So, Mike, even though the title of the show is Rocky Mountain Railroad, there is a portion of the footage that's not in the Rockies. In fact, you do some coverage of the Canadian prairies. What was impressed upon you being a videographer out in the prairies with CPR that maybe you didn't know before? or what was a takeaway for you from working out on the prairies?
Well, the landscape, the landscape is gorgeous out in, the prairies. Getting to Girona there was also really enjoyable.
And it's not actually all flat in the prairies. There are some grades.
I mean, we followed a load from just on the outskirts of the Rockies, sort of right where, like, you drive from Calgary and then you sort of drive right into the Rockies, and there's a potash company that loads the trains up. And
there's unit trains of potash that go
exactly.
west.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. Yeah, because they would start in the prairies, they fill up the train, and then it takes it to a boat in the harbor of Vancouver. And then
did you have any problems filming inside the mine? Did the mining company?
They let us, but they had restrictions, of course, and safety protocols that we respected and followed. Mm-hmm. Filming in the prairies was seen. There was a lot of ghost towns. So as you know, CP Rail essentially, the railroad, in fact, built this country.
Absolutely.
And a lot of small towns were sort of founded off of the train can only go a certain distance before it needs to refuel with coal or
water
all the needs to operate it. And once the technology advanced and the trains could go farther, all of a sudden there's no use for these towns anymore. So you see just abandoned towns all across the country that were just thriving one day, and then the next day.
What's left of them? When you say a ghost town, do you mean literally a ghost town?
I mean buildings that are empty, that have been empty for 60 years now.
They're still there.
Yeah, little stations. Some of them the railroad actually makes a conscious effort to preserve.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
It's a great thing
because of that history.
Totally, yeah. There's one just before the tunnel in Connaught that they preserve. It was an old station that is not in use anymore, but they I think that because this country's history is really very deeply tied into the railroad.
So, not being a train guy, self-professed train guy, rail fan, do you have a new appreciation for those of us who are, having worked on this show?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I can see the interest too, especially for the hobbyist. There's just so many moving parts. And actually, here's a little side note. So I know that there's the word foamer. I'm sure we've all heard the word foamer.
Yeah.
And
not one of my favorite words.
And so some say that it's derogatory, but what I learned on the train that it was actually, they say it's because they foam at the mouth when they see trains. But one of the old school guys at CP told me actually, so at the beginning of the railroad, there was guys that, were train enthusiasts that would show up to the yard and they'd want to, get a ride in their favorite locomotive or see something. And to get that free ride, the old railroad guys would say, if you clean one of these old cars, or one of these old tankers out for us for free, we'll give you a ride. And what they would actually use was a foaming agent to clean it. And so that's where the name foamer came from.
Do you believe that?
I don't know.
Do you think it's legit?
It seems logical, right?
Yeah,
so,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Because that's a much better explanation than
foaming at the mouth.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point about on the railroad they call the old guys, and it's a term of endearment, but they call them old heads. And that's a crown of splendor. I mean, it's a term of endearment.
Sure.
You're revered if you're an old head. Did you have an opportunity to work with old heads as well as newer hires?
Sure.
And could you tell the difference between the 40-year veteran or the 35-year guy and the 3-month guy?
100%.
Yeah. How so?
We did a story on swapping the wheels out. And there was an old head teaching what they would call a green vest. So if you were new, you wear a green vest and you're called a green vest. So, and you could see that they had a world of knowledge, like where to stand, how the rail car is going to move when they lift it up, and they know their stuff, and they can identify any deviation in that you and I would never see. They would inspect the wheel and they'd be like, he's like, that's a crack, and I'm like, that doesn't look like a crack. Oh yeah, no, that's a crack, and they'd have to swap it out. He could see that, but you and I couldn't.
Yeah. it's going to be interesting to see how the railways change as a lot of these old heads retire. I mean, they're making new old guys every day, but the old heads in railroading were around when railroading was different. And, you know, like the caboose, or the van as it's called in Canada, started to disappear around 88, 89. And by the early 90s, they were pretty much gone. Well, that's 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Right? That's 30 years ago. So you're having a whole generation of guys with a 30-year career who have never worked the tail end of a train on a van or a caboose.
Right.
And so railroading is changing, and it's not going to be too many more years before those guys are all gone.
They're all gone, yeah.
Yeah.
They all love their jobs, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they love and respect what they do.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you very much for joining us. This has been wonderful. It's been great to meet you, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And you know the rule, right? We had you on our show.
So you guys got to be on the next show I do.
There you go.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for having me.
Hopefully it's not pulling me out of a truck out of a ditch. So.
Yeah, let's hope not. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mike.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's going to do it for today on the Platforum. Be sure to check out our audio podcast called The Platforum, the Station House audio series, which streams on Spotify. It is unique guests with unique content, different from this show. Be sure to check out our Facebook page, which is Facebook.com/The Platforum. I'm Bob Fallowfield. See you next time.